Siobhan Hynes' body was found on this isolated stretch of rocky foreshore just over a mile from Carraroe on the afternoon of Sunday, December 6th. Gardaí immediately launched a full-scale murder hunt when they established that she'd been violently attacked and beaten somewhere between here and the nearby village.
Siobhan Hynes was born late November 1981 in a Galway hospital and was raised in an Irish-speaking district known as the Gaeltacht, in a small village called Lettermore that is situated in the west of County Galway. The village is on one of a little group of islands connected by a road to the mainland. The main spoken language there is Irish, and students flock to the island every summer to learn it. I have been to a Gaeltacht myself and it was just the best time. The céilís and music and having to use the Irish language everywhere was great fun. Lettermore is a rural community, so it's a tight-knit area and everyone knows everyone. If one person in the community is suffering, the whole community is suffering. Siobhan was a quiet girl as a child, but very happy in herself, but it was very easy to upset her. One story her mother told was a day a mouse came into the kitchen of their house and her mother went to get the cat. But when she turned around, Siobhan was down on her hunkers, staring into the eyes of the mouse. Siobhan said, "Ma'am, oh ma'am, she's so scared." Her ma'am's reply was, "Okay, we'll let her out and we won't tell a soul." Later, when the things that happened to Siobhan came to light, her mother compared it to the mercy she showed to that mouse that day. She was in the mouse's position and no mercy was shown to her. Her best friend would say that Siobhan was a very shy girl when she started school first, but she was very capable. When they were learning to write or draw pictures or anything, hers would be perfect while the others were struggling. She was very good at art, knitting, crochet or crafts. When Siobhan went on to secondary school, she wasn't as shy as she had been once. She developed an interest in music and this seemed to bring out her personality. They went on adventures around the island and looking back they felt so safe wherever they went because they were all from the same community. The weekend after Siobhan's 17th birthday on Saturday the 6th of December 1998, she hadn't anything special planned. Her older sister Anya and her friend were going to a disco in Carraroe that night and Siobhan and her friends decided to go for the spin and maybe try get into the disco, but they were refused as they were underage. So Siobhan and her friends parked the car in the car park attached to the hotel that the disco was being held in and stayed chatting and listening to music. Carraroe is on the mainland and is around 12 miles from Lettermore. Later on, Siobhan needed to use the bathroom and tried to enter the disco, but again they wouldn't let her in. Leaving her friends, she then went to a local pub, but again she was refused entry as the pub was closing up. It was nearly 1 a.m. at this stage. Siobhan continued walking up through the village to try a local takeaway to see if she could use the bathroom there. She would never be seen alive again. After a while her friends went to the takeaway to find her. They couldn't see any sign of her and no one at the takeaway had seen her either. They didn't have any choice but to go home without Siobhan. The next morning her mother woke up realising she had not heard her come in the night before. She went into her bedroom and her bed had not been slept in. She then rang her friend to see if she had spent the night at her house, and unfortunately the answer was no. Everyone that knew her realised pretty quickly that something was wrong. Siobhan's mother then decided to ring the Gardaí to tell them Siobhan was missing. The family and friends headed straight down to Carraroe to search for her. As the day went on, they got more worried as they heard nothing from Siobhan, and with all the searches nothing was being found. It was getting dark and they had torches, so they continued looking for her. By the time they got back home, they got news that she had been found. A local man was out walking his dog on Tishmeen Beach, 2.5 miles from Carraroe village. It was an isolated beach that not many people frequented, especially that time of year. His dog went off rambling and the man decided to follow his dog, and there among the rocks he would find the body of Siobhan. The local priest arrived at the Hynes house to break the news. When Siobhan's mother saw the priest, she knew something terrible had happened. He told her Siobhan had been found at 3:20 p.m. that day on the beach near Carrow and that she was dead. Siobhan's parents were completely numb from hearing the news. Her mother couldn't even cry out. On the day of the funeral, a local man, John McDonough, was arrested and released the same day without charge. There was a lot of talk within the community and people were scared, particularly young girls walking alone at night. People were scared that he was not the killer and someone else was walking among them that was guilty. Neighbours were watching other neighbours and people just didn't trust anyone anymore. In June 1999, John McDonough, 24, was charged with the murder and rape of Siobhan and released on bail. Under the law, he could not be identified until he was arrested. He was from Carrow and worked as a builder's labourer. When they went to arrest him at his job, he put his wrists out in front of him and said, "I was expecting ye."
This morning, 25-year-old John McDonough of the Domain, Carrow in County Galway, was brought before Athboy District Court. He's charged that on the 6th of December last, he murdered Siobhan Hynes at Kieranbeg, Carrow in County Galway. He was also charged with a second serious offence at the same location on the same date.
McDonough was from Carrow and had been out that same night as Siobhan had been. He had been drinking and earlier that night he had bumped into his ex-girlfriend, who had a child for him. He had attacked her and her new boyfriend and the Gardaí were called, but he was let off with a caution and told to go home. While he was not known to the Gardaí officially, they were familiar with him and was known to be a bully and liked to get his own way. His ex-girlfriend would say in court he was controlling and he once kidnapped their child. She was afraid of him and said that it could have been her that night instead of Siobhan. In May of 2001, the trial began at the Central Criminal Court in Dublin. McDonough pleaded not guilty and was confident and intent on listening to every word of evidence that was put forward. When court wasn't in session, he walked around as if he owned the place, chatting to his family and barristers, assuring himself that he would not be found guilty. And the public were excluded from the 28-day trial. When he was giving his own evidence, McDonough had relatives of Siobhan excluded from the court because they were not directly connected with the case. This is a new one for me, but seemingly it's a thing. The Gardaí had their work cut out for them, but a team of 50 Gardaí were put together to collect evidence and do interviews in order to convict McDonough. They had to figure out where he was and what time and who saw him. A total of 147 people gave evidence against him, including his friends. But his family stood by him. The most important thing, though, was to tie McDonough to Siobhan, and they would do this using forensics. On the night of the murder at around 11:45 p.m, McDonough met his ex-girlfriend and he hit her in the back of the head and punched her new boyfriend. The Gardaí were called and he was told to go home, which he didn't. An hour later, at around 12:50 a.m, he was sitting on a wall across from where the disco was being held and he saw Siobhan get out of the car to go to the bathroom. An hour after that again, so around 1:45 a.m, McDonough was seen again in Carrow fighting, and the Gardaí reported that to them it was him making sure he was seen so as to have an alibi. The post-mortem of Siobhan's body showed the awful condition she was in, and evidence that she had put up a fight, and there was a bone broken in her neck when McDonough tried to strangle her. It also showed that she was still alive when she was put in the water, after being dragged from the field where she was raped by McDonough with a foreign object. McDonough had redressed Siobhan in the field and he put her clothes back on incorrectly. Her jeans were put back on her, but they weren't closed. Her jumper and her top were not put back on right either, and there was seaweed found around her body. The forensics showed evidence of close contact between Siobhan and McDonough also. McDonough was wearing a white t-shirt at the beginning of the night. Later on that night he was seen wearing a black t-shirt with a logo on it. His mother admitted washing that t-shirt because he had come home to change his clothes, because he had been fighting in Carrow publicly. When MacDonagh was asked to bring in the clothes he was wearing earlier that night, he did not bring the white t-shirt. The Gardaí found this t-shirt when they were collecting evidence and tests were done on it. There were threads from Siobhan's clothes on MacDonagh's clothes and vice versa. Fibres from the fleece jacket were also found in the front passenger seat of MacDonagh's car, and fibres from his red fluffy car seat covers matched 2 red fibres found on Siobhan's clothes. When everything came together, it made a pretty clear picture that he was the murderer. On the 17th of June 2001, after 3 days of deliberation, a jury of 3 men and 9 women found MacDonagh guilty of Siobhan's murder. Cries of yes were echoed around the Four Courts round hall outside the courtroom, as the verdicts of guilty were relayed to supporters of the Hynes family outside. Mr. Justice Smith rose until calm was restored. When he returned, sentencing on the rape conviction was adjourned until July 23rd, at the request of the defence. Mr. Justice Smith said, "In relation to the murder, I am obliged under statute to impose the sentence of life imprisonment, and I do that now." MacDonagh's solicitors said they would immediately put in for an appeal on both convictions. MacDonagh himself put his head on the courtroom bench and started crying. With his family surrounding him, he sat crying for several minutes after sentencing was passed. Ah, poor baby. A month later, MacDonagh was sentenced to 10 years on top of his life sentence for the rape, and he still sits in Arbour Hill to this day, 21 years later, but he could be out soon. In February 2007, he appealed his conviction and stated that he had no intent to kill Siobhan and therefore should be acquitted of the murder charges. But the appeal court said there was no rational explanation why Siobhan had been moved from the field where she was raped down to the beach where she was found, if this was not done so to cause her death. A garden of remembrance was built in honour of all the young people from the area who have passed away one way or another in the last 20 years, and unfortunately poor Siobhan is included. There has been a lot of tragedies in the area. The waterfall represents the tears the families and friends have shed when someone has died. Siobhan's parents take comfort that Siobhan is among those other names that will always be remembered, and there is a certain comfort in knowing their daughter isn't the only one who has died. They say it's lonely to go to the Garden of Remembrance, but it's also nice as it helps keep the memory of Siobhan alive.